Good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving up part of your Monday morning to come and listen to me, as we say in New Zealand, prattle on a little bit. I'm going to start off this morning with a bouquet and to talk about the importance of friends. In 2006, when I first joined the university, one of the tasks that I was given was to be jointly responsible for emergency preparedness planning on the university. And we found out pretty quickly that one of the things that we needed to do first was to actually learn from a lot of other people. So we spent quite a lot of time stealing ideas from other people and picking on them and picking their brains. And one of the people that we picked on, of course, was Virginia Tech. And I have had the pleasure of being on the campus and spent some time with Mark previously. And Mark took fantastic care of us, as did George Jackson, who was extremely kind to us and showed us a lot. So we actually went home with a lot of good ideas. So from the University of Canterbury to Virginia Tech, just a general thank you for sharing ideas and sharing information and helping us get ready for what I'm about to tell you about. Just a very little note about the university, just so you've got a little bit of context. Our main campus, and the button is not going to work for me this morning, that's jolly good. There we go. We're a very suburban campus. This is the main part of our campus down through here, where most of our buildings are. We have about 220 buildings in total. We own the whole central part of this area through here, which is a combination of our halls of residence and large playing fields. We've got a historic homestead in here and gardens around it, and our College of Education is over here. It's just under a mile, basically, from perimeter to perimeter. And I'll just point out, because they're relevant for a little bit later on, this piece of grass here and this piece of grass here, because it's no longer grass. Just to give you a wee bit of concept of the hazardscape, one of our relatively short-term Prime Ministers coined this quote, which we've often used, and it certainly does reflect the fact that we sit on the plate margin between the Pacific Plate and the Australasian Plate. New Zealand was basically created by earthquakes. We have an alpine chain which runs directly up the South Island, straight through the North Island and out into the Pacific Ocean through here. So we are very well aware of the fact that earthquakes are part of our reality. And the question for us is, when was the big one going to strike? We believed that it was always going to come from this alpine fault, which is a very similar fault to the San Andreas. So we've been studying what's happening in California and the history of California a lot. As I mentioned, in 2006 I joined the university. Part of the process was or part of the responsibility was to get us up to speed. We had a look at what was in place, and within a relatively short period of time we threw it all out and started again. We developed a brand new plan. We developed a whole series of procedures that we needed to put together. We put a web presence up and started working down the process of trying to teach people exactly what we felt that they needed to know about any kind of a major incident. We took an all hazards approach, so we weren't just focusing on earthquakes. It's basically anything that's potential. As I said before, we took a lot of ideas from overseas. New Zealand has adopted the NIMS process, which was developed in the US. We changed the name to SIMS so that you wouldn't realise that we'd stolen the idea. Very thinly veiled. And we went through a process of building our foundations. Our foundations includes a dedicated urban search and rescue team that we have for the university. That has not been utilised previously, but in February, of course, we had to make very good use of it. Our training was extremely important to us. We went through regular games and we played all sorts of games, both with the teams that had to respond and with our executive team. And we have some video and comment from my Vice-Chancellor, which is the equivalent of your President, Charles Steger. And one of the comments that he makes is that it's often very difficult for the executive team of a university to play games. And we would often do that. We would go into the room and we would say, this is what's just happened. What are we going to do about it? And we'd work them through the process. And they were extremely good, and they engaged with us a lot. No guesses for the image on the right-hand side. We, in New Zealand, is very different to the US. We don't have a police force on campus. We have a national police force. So we actually had to go and engage with them, bring them to campus and get them to come and play with us. They found that very interesting. The 2009 research trip that I took, I had identified a number of universities that I needed to go and visit so that I could actually find out what they had done previously, what had actually happened to them, and what they learnt afterwards. And for us, it was more about what had they learnt afterwards. So we started off with California State Northridge, which in 1994 had been badly affected by the Northridge earthquake. They had faced a tremendous number of things that we ended up having to face as well. So we had learnt a lot from them. I went through to Louisiana and looked at issues that had happened to New Orleans, to Louisiana State, University of New Orleans. We are now talking a lot with Tulane University, which had to go through pretty much the same pain that we are now going through. And of course I ended up at Virginia Tech and found a lot more information specifically around the communications and what needed to happen afterwards. One of the things that we developed during late 2008, 2009 is I felt that we needed to have a dedicated operations centre for any major emergency. So we managed to do a bit of a Houdini act. We own about 60 houses around the university and we managed to make one of them disappear. It was quite a feat. So this whole house has been created as a dedicated emergency operations centre. I left for the 2009 trip with some very firm ideas about how I wanted this to operate, and some of the information that I gained while I was over here convinced me that I needed to change my thinking, went back and made the adjustments. So by the time we actually got to 2010, we actually had a facility that we were in a position to turn on instantaneously and make use of, which has proven to be extremely valuable to us. Larry mentioned that in 2010 we had a conference down and we managed to convince Larry and a couple of people from California State Northridge to come and speak to us. First of all, I had to teach them how to speak Kiwi. Once we got over that education process, it was a fantastic event, and Larry was an amazing resource to us, taught us a tremendous amount. 4th of September 2010, 4:35 a.m. on a Saturday morning. It was out of term time on a holiday weekend, and I was sound asleep in my bed. To try and give you some kind of an understanding of what happens in a major earthquake, I woke to the sound of what sounded like a 747 jumbo jet trying to land on my house, because you can hear the sound coming before you actually feel the shaking. For those of you that did feel the recent earthquake on the East Coast, I'm not sure whether you found the same thing, but a 7.1 magnitude is certainly attention-getting. I'd actually made it to the bedroom door frame before the shaking actually started and had to hold on. Until the shaking stopped, there was no way that I was actually going to walk down the hall of my house. It was so devastating that it knocked the power out throughout pretty much the whole of Christchurch City. I was fortunate that we live about 30 minutes north of the city. The power in our area managed to stay on, but it was quite a different situation in the city. It's pretty hard to try and quantify 671 kilotons of energy. If you put it into the context of a nuclear bomb, Mother Nature has it in spades. We can't even come close. 4th of September was, we talk about the earthquake, you can see by the screen, at the end of the first day we'd had 98 earthquakes. At the end of the first week we were approaching 1,200 earthquakes by the end of that first week. So this is not a one-shot deal. You were lucky with the East Coast one that was a big shake and it stopped. Ours have continued, as you'll come to see. Our activation response, because we had played the games, because we had the facilities, because we had actually done the thinking in advance, it was pretty much an automatic reaction. I managed to make it to our operations centre about 45 minutes after the earthquake. I was sad to see that I was not the first one in the door, which is what I intended. My engineering colleague had made it there first, and as I turned in the driveway to the house, the only light that I had seen coming through Christchurch City was coming from our EOC, and that was quite a nice sight to see. We had a very quick initial briefing with my security staff to tell us that what we needed to know. We knew very quickly that we didn't have very many people on campus and that we didn't have any injuries, so our attention turned very quickly to the security of the campus and what we needed to do. So my Vice-Chancellor was on site by about 6 a.m. And we were starting to work through the process of what did this mean for the university and what were we going to have to do. Our immediate priorities, as yours are, obviously, is people first. We certainly worry about that before we worry about the buildings themselves. But security of the campus became a major issue for us. We are very technological. All of our buildings are electronically locked. They're all battery backed up, but they have a lifespan of those batteries. And we found very quickly the deficiencies that we had not taken any notice of. And it's nothing like one of these events to actually wake you up and say, well, you should have had a look at this beforehand. As the batteries started to die and the doors released, as they automatically do, and we started trying to lock the doors down, we found that there were locks on the doors which hadn't been turned for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, or we couldn't find a key to them. One door, I resorted to parking a car up against it to actually keep the door shut, because we became the biggest Walmart in Christchurch. Had people known, we would have lost a tremendous amount of gear. As it was, we probably lost about $30,000 worth of equipment with just opportunist people that had found that they could get in. Where they came from, I have no idea. Closure of the university was a big issue. In our structure, I have executive authority of our senior management team and our university's council to make whatever decisions immediately I need to do to save life and to protect the university. I don't have to refer to anybody. But the difference between shutting the university down and evacuating it is quite different from closing the university. And one of the things that exercised the Vice-Chancellor tremendously was how long would we be closed for? What would this mean to the academic program? And he was very focused very quickly on making sure that the information that we put out was accurate, it was timely, and he did not want to go back over any decision. So before he made the decision, he wanted to know that that decision was going to be set in concrete. And that proved to be very valuable for us over the period. Once the daylight came and we started having a look at the university, we started seeing how much damage had actually occurred. Like a lot of universities, we go through a staged process of identifying issues and starting to deal with them. And there's very few institutions, and we're certainly part of that bucket, that have the ability, resources, both financially and in human capital, to go through and deal with things that we know needs to be dealt with very quickly. One of the things that we had been dealing with is the book stacks in our libraries. We had seismically braced a lot of them, but as you can see by the image on the right-hand side there were a lot that wasn't. I know that when I went up there later on that first day to have a look for myself, it certainly gave me pause to think what it would have been like had this been the middle of a teaching day and had we had hundreds and hundreds of students and staff in amongst those book stacks. We had in excess of 1 million volumes of books lying off the shelves. Even the shelves that didn't collapse actually threw their books off, so there were large piles in between the stacks. Unfortunately for our librarians, they've had to pick those books up 3 times now. These are some of the images. This is another of our libraries that you can see that walking into that and trying to actually work out how you're going to deal with that is quite an issue. This is on level 5 of our central library, our interloan section. It would have been rather unpleasant to have been in there at the time. Across the rest of our campus, the image on the right-hand side is our commerce building. It has a large glass atrium that joins 2 pieces of the building together. Fortunately, the atrium stayed up in September, but the tiles all around the outside of that central core shattered. A lot of them, as you can see by the floor, fell. Others didn't fall, they took off like projectiles, so had anybody been in there at the time, they would have been peppered with these things. The left-hand image, I should say, is right-hand image, I get it right, is one of our academic offices, and the academic concerned assures me that that is not the way he left it on Friday. Some of the offices, I'm not sure that that's true. One of the things that we had done with playing our games is that we had confronted the issue of how do you close a university with no gates and with no fences. And one of the games had progressed to the point where we decided that we needed some resources, that if we ever did come face to face with having to close the university, we needed things in place. And the sign that you see there is actually a vinyl sign that was pulled over our main gate sign. And we had one for every single gate on the campus already prepared and rolled up and in a storeroom at our EOC. So we were in a position that once the Vice-Chancellor made the decision to close the university, it took us less than 2 hours to have this signage up. It proved to be very effective, and it underlined the benefit of actually going through those planning processes and doing the what-if process. This is a shot from the inside of our Emergency Operations Centre. We settled into a routine extremely quickly of having multiple daily briefings. The photograph that you see there is a combination of the incident management team, which is sitting around the table, and we brought in a lot of our senior executive team behind that. So each of the key briefings, we were all together in the same room and were able to share the information firsthand. There was no secrets, there was nothing being hidden, and it made a tremendous difference that we kept that as a very open process. I said previously that I went away to the US intending to develop our EOC in one direction and changed the thinking on that. My original intention was to find somewhere around about half a mile away for my executive team and to put them over there and then go and see them on a regular basis and tell them what was happening. The information I got from New Orleans, or specifically Louisiana State, was keep the boss as close as you can. We had changed our process and they literally occupied one part of our EOC. So it was extremely easy for us to interact with them.
Chris, why don't you identify who some of those folks are so people have an idea of the roles that they play? That's the most important thing, I think.
Certainly, no trouble at all. This is Michael Oliver. This is my security services team leader. He's ex-London Metropolitan Police. This is Dave Lang. He's the group manager of capital development and operations. Very instrumental person, especially following the February earthquake. You can't see him, but this is our operations manager, our engineering services manager, 6'8" Dutchman. You don't take him lightly. Our planning and intelligence manager, who was the director of facilities management. This is our president, Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Rod Carr. The rest of the team are basically support team. We've got administration for the team, the EOC manager, communications staff, student liaison. This is actually a very important person. This is my fairy godmother. You can't see her wings or her halo, but she has both, and I'll explain that in a minute. And arrayed around behind this is the leader of our Science College, Pro Vice-Chancellor. The head of our IT is beside him. To the left is our Chief Financial Officer. And we carry on through the rest of our senior team, head of HR, head of 2 more of the colleges, and a number of other IT and academic staff sort of spread around out of shot. So very, very much the core of the university that needed to make decisions very quickly as to what we were doing and how we would approach things. The communications we had already understood were going to be incredibly important. We needed to make sure that in this substantial event which was going to close the university and prevent people from actually getting into the university, we had to tell them very quickly why that was. Because we were aware that there was a lot of research that was going on in the university. There were research projects that had to be attended to on a 24-hour basis. And we had learnt, first of all, from California State Northridge, and they've got a particularly poignant shot following the earthquake in 1994 of an academic staff member with his fingers through a chain link fence, looking at his whole world burning in the chemistry building. So we knew that we would have to be very focused on making sure that our academic colleagues understood what was happening and why. And Larry had given us some incredibly good information about making sure that the quality of your information was timely and how to put that through. So we worked very quickly and very cautiously on what we were doing. And the communications process through the web, pretty much everything that we knew that we could share, we shared as quickly as we possibly could. So we were literally putting things out within about an hour and a half in September, and in February within about an hour we were giving the information about what we were doing, why we were doing it, and why people could not come back onto the campus. As we started working through the process of getting back into the campus, we still were in a position, because of the human resources that we don't have available to us, we actually had to enlist our colleagues, both technical staff and academic staff, to come back in and help us assess and tell us what we needed to do. So we did a very carefully staged return. The image on the top right is of individual briefings we gave to special technical groups, that we gave them the requirement to go into their area, to assess what needed to be done, to record it and come back out and give it to our HR team, who then collated that information, gave it back to the incident management team, and then that allowed us to start working through a priority list. The bottom left-hand image is of what the Canadians tell me is their town hall meetings, and you may have the same, where we started bringing large numbers of our campus back onto the campus with the intention of actually starting to get us back together, because again, we needed those resources. We don't have the cleaning staff available to us to go through and completely clean the university up after a major earthquake. This was an amazing experience to us because the staff turned up in their droves. They brought their recycling bins, their gardening gloves, their shovels, anything that they thought that they might need, and they got in and they picked up glass and they picked up potted plants that had been smashed on the ground, and they started putting things back to rights. The atmosphere in there was so amazing that if I'd been able to, I would have bottled it, because occasionally we need to let that out just to remind people what it was like. The bottom right-hand image is of our Vice-Chancellor. Again, Professor Paul Fleming is the leader of our chemistry college, or science college, just to his right, to his left. The head of our communications and our Deputy Vice-Chancellor. They walked around with high visibility vests on and little signs around their necks which defined where they were permitted to go and where they weren't permitted to go for 2 weeks following the September event. Our academic year starts in February, ends in November. We have, because of the way our seasons work, our summer holidays, of course, are over the Christmas period. We were coming up to the end of our academic year, the end of semester 2, and into exams. And we were still feeling reasonably major aftershocks. So we had to go through a process of figuring out what we were going to do if we got another major shock during exam period. We had, as it turns out, 110 felt aftershocks, none of them really major. But we had to have a process in place that if we had the university full of people sitting down and diligently beavering away over their exam papers, how were we going to evacuate them? So the resources we had to put in there were pretty substantial. The aftershock plan, just to give you a quick look, we defined them into 3 categories. A was pretty easy. The biggest aftershock was going to be the easiest one to deal with, because that was everybody out, go home, you know, tick off your name and we know you're okay and please leave. It was the low end of B and into C that was the problem, because that is when some people get rattled and want to leave, other people are quite happy to carry on, and you've got to sort of fit in between those 2 states. And fortunately we didn't have to enact this particularly over this period. Capturing the lessons was important to us. We had learnt a lot from other people. We wanted to ensure that we shared that. Erica, who I pointed out to you before, I brought into the EOC by about midday on the first day, and I tasked her with following me round and making sure that the incident team were actually doing the right things, that I was doing the right things, and that anything that she felt that I needed to do, she'd come and whisper quietly in my ear. And she became one of the authors of Shaken But Not Stirred, which is the report of our September experience. We now have to write volume 2, but that's going to take a little bit longer. The gaps to close we knew were that we were very lucky. It was early morning, it was on a weekend, nobody was killed, there was only 2 injuries across the city, which was quite amazing. But the game changers for us, especially looking at the stacks in the libraries, were if it had been a major event, what would we have done having to get people out from in amongst those stacks? And we knew that we had a very small incident team, so we didn't actually have the capacity really to run for 24 hours a day for maybe more than about 2 or 3 days before people started falling over. And then we had to start going through the business continuity issues. September to February was an interesting period. We found a lot of our staff wanted to get back to normal quickly. They didn't want to have to deal with the issues around the earthquake, and a lot of our people started just going back into their normal routines, and then started to put demands on a lot of the staff that were still trying to deal with recovery from a major earthquake. We had some quite severely damaged buildings, not to the point where we weren't able to occupy them over that period, but sufficient that we had probably 2 years worth of work to do. We had appointed contractors, a project office to come and work with us, and we were starting to work through that rebuilding process and rejuvenation. We had continued aftershocks. We had a very, very quiet Christmas Day and made up for it on Boxing Day. 4.9 is certainly big enough to get your attention. So Christmas Day I spent at home, Boxing Day I spent on campus. One of the things that was an interesting social statement, I suppose, on people and the resilience of people is over this period, the city of Christchurch, in fact part of the region of Canterbury, started playing a game, and the game was guess that earthquake, guess that aftershock. So we'd have an aftershock that would come through and it rattled all the buildings, and the reaction from most people was that was a 4.2, it would be about 15 kilometres away and maybe 8 kilometres deep. And everybody got very good at playing the game. They were playing it on the radio. You know, the first person that rings up with the correct magnitude will win something. And it was a way, I suppose, of actually letting people sort of settle back down and come to terms with what was a very destabilising feeling. You know, you think the ground is stable, and when it starts to move under your feet, you find that it's not quite. But what that did is that when February came along, it created a situation where people didn't react quite as quick as they should have done. February the 22nd, 12:51 p.m, second day of our first semester, City of Christchurch, and it was not just another aftershock. February 22nd changed the rules for us all. It was only a 6.3 magnitude earthquake on the Richter scale, but the Richter scale does not give you a particularly good understanding of what the effect of an earthquake is. The modified Mercalli scale is actually much more accurate because it defines the effects rather than simply the release of energy. It was only 49 kilotons and considerably less than 671 kilotons that was released in September. But it created a peak ground acceleration which exceeded twice the force of gravity. There is no other earthquake, my geologists tell me, and I'm not a geologist, but they tell me that it has not been recorded anywhere previously from an earthquake. It may have occurred, but not when anybody was around. Christchurch sits on an alluvial plain, which is about 10 kilometres deep, different layers of shingles, and then it drops into an undulating layers of greywacke and igneous rock, and they butt hard up against two extinct volcanoes. So we've got very, very hard rock leading into quite malleable shingles and soils. What happened where this earthquake originated was that it created an effect a bit like landing on a trampoline when you would, as a kid, when you were coming down and the trampoline was coming back up. And it fired a shockwave straight into the heart of Christchurch City, which demolished one building almost instantaneously, collapsed another major multi-storey building, and did a tremendous amount of damage across the city. There are now 181 confirmed deaths. Over 2,000 people were injured in the central city. As I said, two major buildings collapsed, and a significant number of our high-rise buildings were badly damaged. One of our major hotels had 4 key pillars, one in each corner. One of the pillars shattered at its base and the building started to fall. It's about a 38-storey hotel. Fortunately, it was close enough to the building next to it that before it got inertia up, it actually arrested up against their next building. And it was full of people. They had a big conference on at the time. And the building inside, the photographs are just amazing to see. I certainly would have needed another pair of trousers had I been in that building. The whole of Christchurch became a red zone. Now, please forgive me, I will warn you, when I got producing this, you know, death by PowerPoint is a well-known phenomenon, and I certainly didn't want to do that. And I found it just a little bit hard to explain to everybody what it was actually like on February the 22nd. We did not know, as we started to deal with the events on campus, whether any of our buildings had come down. I was aware within about 2 minutes that there were major buildings down in Christchurch and substantial number of deaths. I had spoken to our resident police officer. We have a liaison on our campus, and he was heading for the centre of Christchurch in a hurry, and he let me know on the way out the gate. So as we dealt with this, we knew that this was happening in the centre of Christchurch, and we knew that we had thousands of people to deal with on campus. The effect on Christchurch was pretty substantial, as you can see. The effect on the university was not as bad. We didn't have any buildings that actually collapsed. We didn't have any major injuries on campus. but we still had a lot of confusion. As I said before, it was the second day of our first semester, a traditional time when there's a tremendous amount of activity. Lectures are starting, there's a lot of club activity on campus as well. Excuse me. Our incident management team responded the way that they had been trained to do. Our USAR team responded in the same way, but we still had this issue with the prevalence for people to have been playing games previously, and we struggled in some cases to get people to evacuate and to continue to work. Our own mass communication systems to tell people what needed to be done at that stage or what we needed them to do were not sufficiently good that we were able to reinforce that message. And on that occasion, thankfully, Mother Nature came along and sent a 5.8 magnitude aftershock just to give everybody the message that they should do what we were asking them to do. Unlike September the 4th, our cell system in September the 4th stayed up because everybody was in bed. It was easy enough to communicate. February the 22nd, it died very, very quickly. It just got completely overloaded. So our ability to use mass text messages was taken away from us, and we also had to go through the process of not actually knowing whether or not our families were okay. So it took me until about 4:30 that afternoon to find out that my family were okay, and that we had to just continue working through that process and hoping for the best. Again, some of the images that we had across campus were very similar. A lot of the things that we had already started to fix just got broken again. And in this case, it was more than books that were falling out of the roofs of our libraries. We found that very quickly that the structural damage was more substantial. Priority, of course, again, was the same thing, was evacuate the campus, much more difficult in February than it was in September. The welfare of our people, and then trying to identify the extent of the damage and to shut the university down. Fortunately, it was much easier to close the second time around. We've now done that multiple times, and now it's much, much easier to close. I was into the EOC very quickly. The Vice-Chancellor took a little bit of time to arrive, and you will enjoy knowing, I'm sure, that the Vice-Chancellor was having a lunch at the time of the earthquake with the ambassador to the US and one of the senior senators, I think it was from the US, along with some of our leadership from our country, and they all met underneath the table. So they dropped, covered and held. So the US ambassador was right there doing what he was told, so it was good to see. Knowledge of the deaths in Christchurch and the level of the destruction spread very quickly across the campus, and that certainly put a very, very sombre pall over the top of everybody that was responding. It took us that day 5 hours to evacuate our campus and to start working through the welfare issues. One of the major things that we had not played a game about was what happens when you evacuate your campus instantaneously, or as close as we could get to it, and everybody rushes out of their buildings, and you say, well, thank you very much, you can't go back into your building, please go home. And they go, well, my wallet, keys to the house, keys to the car, everything that I've got is actually still in the building. And that proved to be a major issue that we had to deal with, so that those welfare issues of trying to get people off campus and get them successfully home. We had gone through a process in our planning that we had developed an personal emergency kit. We had hammered home the personal responsibility aspects to emergency preparedness previously, and we had told a lot of people that, especially women that come to work with high heel shoes, that if you ever have to leave campus or get out of a building that's badly damaged, you need to have a pair of sneakers or something in the bag, medication, all of these sorts of things. The concepts worked very well for some people that thought enough to grab the bag as they left the office if they were in there. A lot of other people didn't. And in the central city, of course, a lot of people had to walk a long way because there was no transport. They couldn't get to their cars either. So that day was an extremely long day. Our operations and building structures team started going through the processes very quickly about what they needed to do, and working through the process of how badly damaged the university was. We were keeping in mind what had happened in the central part of the city. Again, communications were critical. Our Vice-Chancellor was putting video clips up on our website very, very quickly, talking to our community, telling them what was happening, what we were doing, and you know, that we would be keeping in very close communications with them. Part of the process in September we found interesting was that our students, in fairly large numbers, started ringing us up very quickly and saying, hey, look, we want to help. You know, what can we do to help? You know, we want to come to campus and do something. And we had to say, thanks very much, but there's not much that you can do. And they said, well, blow you, you know, if we can't help you, we'll go and help someone else. And they organised themselves into, in September, what was termed the silkworms. We had a major issue in Christchurch with liquefaction, and liquefaction is a heinous thing. When the ground starts to shake like that and the liquid sort of comes out of all the surrounding soils and just floats to the surface, and it does things like bringing all the pipes out of the ground as well, which is a bit of a problem. But it comes out in some cases like a volcano, and I've actually seen what looks like a volcanic cone on the ground after the stuff is actually blown up. But it dries very quickly, and it's a very nasty stuff. It completely destroys people's gardens, and in certain circumstances it can actually force its way through the concrete pad of a house and actually come up inside the house. And of course people were standing there looking at this devastation in the residential areas and sort of not knowing what to do. And for us, and I'm sure it'll be the same for you, the concept of several thousand students marching down the centre of a suburban street singing would actually scare most people. That's what normally would have happened. In this case, our students went out into the community with their wheelbarrows and their shovels, and they walked into people's houses, and just like ants, they just cleaned off the houses. And we had residents in tears ringing us up to tell us what they thought of our students, which was quite an unusual experience, because normally they ring us up in tears telling us what they think of our students in a different way. February the 22nd, we also found very quickly that we did not need our urban search and rescue team. And we were very fortunate that we were able to then turn around to the City of Christchurch and say, we have a fully trained USAR team. Do you want them? And it was, hang on, let me think about that. Yes, please send them right now. So we put our USAR team into the centre of Christchurch, and they spent the next several weeks in there as part of the response. And I should say that and you saw one of the images towards the end of the AV clip was of the Taiwanese team that had come down to help us. America sent us a very well resourced team that came from California, hugely appreciated. The international response and the international support that we received was incredible. This is just a couple of shots of our student volunteer army, and as I can say, you can see them walking down the centre of a suburban street. In this case, not so scary. The response again became recovery for us, and it changes from the response to the recovery very quickly, as I'm sure you all know. We understood that the buildings had collapsed in the centre of Christchurch, and we came face to face with the understanding very quickly that some of those that collapsed had been structurally assessed and had been passed for occupation, and yet they had still collapsed. So we had to take 3 steps back, because we had followed exactly the same process of assessing our buildings after September. And we said, well, we're not going to go there. We're actually going to be a lot more pedantic about what we do and how we assess our buildings. So we developed a completely new process to go through. That also included, it was initially a 5-step process, and then became a 6-step process, where we said, would this building stand up to another major earthquake of the same magnitude and the same effect, even given it was at 100% of its design strength in 1976 or 1978? And we have just announced the demise of the first of our buildings, which we will pull down, not because it fell down, not because we couldn't fix it. It's because it is not designed sufficiently to withstand what we now know is capable of occurring. This is a shot of the 5-step building process, and we added the 2B for the maximum credible event assessment. And that's actually been a very difficult thing for our university to come to terms with, and our insurers, who are standing looking at a building saying, well, why can't you keep it? Unfortunately, we have a couple of ugly buildings on campus, and neither of those are in a position to pull down. I must admit that I do walk past one of them and give it a good swift kick every time I do, just to see if it'll help. But learning, adjusting and adapting became our mantra over that period. We had already learned. We had learnt from you folk. We had learnt from California. We adjusted by very quickly understanding that we couldn't use our university, but we needed to be a university. You can't just shut down for a long period of time and expect things to continue on. So our answer to that was to follow to a degree, the Northridge example, where they created a makeshift university that they lived out of for a number of years as they went back and fixed their main campus. We didn't have access to the resources that they did, and we certainly didn't have access to the money that they did at the time. So we created a canvas campus. Across two of our capital car parks, we put tents, large marquees. We put wireless internet emitters in the sides of them. We put whiteboards up at the end of them, and we got our lecturers in, and we gave them a whiteboard marker and an eraser and a little desk at the front, and we said, go teach. It was an interesting experience. Some of our lecturers, as any critical incident, you find the people that shine and the people that struggle, and we had all of those across our campus. Some of our lecturers were walking out of the tent having taught in a flapping tent on a relatively hot day, as it still was at the time, and having only used a whiteboard marker saying, that was fantastic, I loved it. Other ones we had to be just a little bit more cotton woolish with them and give them a lot more support. We adjusted our teaching programs by every method that we could come up with. And our assessment processes had to change very quickly. We had an academic team that went through those processes in another room, and they had to deal with their academic colleagues, and there was a number of swear words coming out of that room on a regular basis. We adapted by, again, understanding that we still have, to this day, 8 buildings which we are unable to occupy on it, 8 capital buildings. So we have created villages on the 2 grassed areas that I pointed out on that one of the first slides, that we've created literally a Portacom city on 2 of those that we will be teaching in for about 5 weeks. About every 3 days we would change the maps around campus as we started bringing our students back on board, saying here is the area that you can go and here's the area you can't. The red hatched areas that you can see are all the areas, and this is 4 weeks on, that you can't actually go into. We had them completely fenced off. A little shot of our Canvas campus. Necessity was the mother of invention, and we created Canvas lecture theatres. As you can see at that stage, it was nice and warm, and our students were very happy. They were coming back, they were getting back in. We were up and running after this earthquake in about 2.5 weeks. We were teaching again in different forms. So it certainly managed to get everybody still re-engaged. This is a shot of our Kirkwood village. This is the lower right-hand one. And we started occupying the top buildings, these ones here. We were teaching in those ones while we were still building these ones. So we have 60 buildings on that site and 40 buildings. So we built 100 buildings, and we did that extremely quickly. Monday the 13th of June, Mother Nature again reminded us that she is the one that's in charge, and we just have to go with her belly rumbles, or whatever you want to call them. We had a 5.7 magnitude earthquake, which again changed the rules, because the rules are that you normally get the major earthquake and then you get subsequent aftershocks which are below that magnitude. We were again extremely lucky, so she does do some things that are quite nice for us. She gave us a 5.7 magnitude earthquake and then followed it with a 6.3. By the time the 6.3 came through, the university had been completely evacuated, and more importantly, the central city had been completely evacuated. They estimate that had it been the other way round, they probably would have lost about 50 of the workers in the central city that were working on damaged buildings and starting to do the major demolitions. The aftershocks that we've received so far, up until when I checked last night before I went to bed, was now 8,744 since September the 4th. Lessons learned for us, and I'll share with you. When something happens, you don't have time to think about it, you only have time to react. If you haven't done the planning, if you haven't done the thinking, and if you haven't played the games, it's too late. herding cats is not easy. And academics, forgive me for any of the academic colleagues that are in the room, but academics can often be like cats, especially if they have something very special in their office or in their research lab that they want to get back into. And we do find that they will literally force their way past somebody at the entrance to a building that is badly damaged. One of our academics went back into a building which will take us 18 months to put back together again. And he went through the area of the Commerce building where the big glass atrium was, and it was just about ready to release. So, and a lot of breakages on the mounting plates. The core teams need to be practiced, they need to be trained, and they need to be ready to react. The education of our people is really critical. It's interesting to know now that we have very little problems in telling our staff about what they need to do in an earthquake. They're all very much attuned to listening to what we need to say to them. And one of the other issues that we knew we were going to have to deal with is situational leadership. You know, the standard process for a university is very collegiate and consultative. In a major event, it becomes command and control, military style. You will do this, you will do that. And that is also very difficult for some people to accept and adjust to. And the disruption is total in an event like this, and I know that I can't speak to a university that knows this better than you do, is that the disruption is absolutely total when something major, critical occurs. At the end of the day, our students were the joy of our lives. This is the first issue of the Student Magazine for 2011. And you can see what their attitude was, and a lot of them were walking around with smiles on their faces and saying, we can handle this, it's not a problem, it's not going to stop us. Mother Nature continues to tell us that she's in charge. Christchurch is not like Blacksburg. We do not get a lot of snow. We certainly don't get two massive snow dumps within weeks of each other, which we are not geared up for. We do not have the resources or the ability to clear our pathways and clear our car parks. And we had two of these this last winter. We had a very mild winter followed by two spits from the Southern Ocean. And now, in the university's history, we have had the university now closed 5 times, and all within one 12-month period. I'm going to close the presentation by saying Kia kaha Christchurch. Kia kaha is Maori for stay strong, and you're welcome to any questions. Thank you very much for listening.